So your firm has a project, Crown Sydney. Tell us about that project. What do you think it contributes to the city?
Well, it's a tall building, and it's on the northwest corner of the CBD. And when I first saw the site, I thought it was the most fantastic site in the world.
Why did you think that?
Well, because it's got the waterfront, it's got views of the bridge and the Opera House at high level. And it just, I don't know, when you combine it with the Headland Park, it's just a beautiful location.
So what do you think the project is going to contribute to this? I mean, it's a beautiful location either way, so what does your building bring
Well,
to it?
I felt that the architecture needed to be sculptural, so I was looking for a sculptural form that would sort of define the northwest corner of the CBD, and I worked on the ideas. It was a competition. I worked through some ideas to try and create something unusual, so it's not just a vertical extrusion. It twists, and it has a change in shape as it goes up. So it's very sculptural form.
How do you develop a sculptural form like that? What's your design process?
Well, on this occasion, I started with referring back to nature, and also to a sculpture I'd been working on previously. The sculpture had 3 petals, and they twisted as they rose up in the air, and I rather liked the visual effect that gave. And after a lot of thinking, I came round to the idea of using this concept, filling in the space between the tips of the petals, so you got a twisting form which changes in shape as it goes up. Because the petals change in shape as they go up, so it's much smaller at the top and larger towards the bottom. So it's an interesting piece of geometry, if you like, and that sets up the form of the building.
So you're a sculptor as well. Does that frequently influence the forms of your built work?
Well, I'm not specifically a sculptor.
Okay.
I play around with. I'm interested in painting and drawing and sculpture, actually, and I draw inspiration from all of these things when I can and when I need to.
How does that work make its way into your architectural work?
Well, I have a way of starting the design process, which is an intensive sort of study of the site and the brief, and I often sketch the site, spend a bit of time sketching, and as I'm drawing, ideas seem to start flowing.
The ideas start flowing once you start drawing the site.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere. You can't just think and hope that everything will come together. You have to start the process, and in my case, I start drawing.
And it always flows from the site. In other words, you don't have a preconceived shape that you want to build, and then you find a project and just plant that there.
No, I don't really believe in that. I think that certainly all of our projects are site-specific, and they relate to the site.
But it seems like there's plenty of built work out there that doesn't. So how do you think is the answer just to ask architects to pay more attention to the site, or is there something that can be done to make more work responsive to where it actually is?
Well, I think the competition process helps that, actually, because when you have a competition and you have 5 or 6 architects looking at the project, the brief and the site, I suppose some of them might have some idea at the back of their mind which they want to reuse, but it's inevitably going to be site-specific.
So the theme of this conference is connected cities. What does that mean to you?
I'm not absolutely sure, but I do believe in that architecture is international, and I'm showing 5 schemes in my lecture, on my talk this morning, which 2 in Australia, 1 in Canada, 1 in China, and 1 in London. So if you, I sort of feel that in a way answers the questions, that That's 4 different countries and 4 different continents, actually. So I feel that I'm spreading and connecting up cities in my way, anyway.
So you're saying cities across the world can be connected by the design of the tall buildings in them?
They're inevitably connected by the people that are moving. I mean, most cities now are pretty. They're pretty cosmopolitan, really. Certainly, I come from London, which is very cosmopolitan, and I think there's a benefit that comes from that. Actually, so you get a sort of vibrancy. It's which is kind of looking outwards. And assimilating ideas and different cultures from around the world. So the cities aren't so specific these days.
They're not so specific. That would sound like they're more similar. I mean, but certainly you'd want a building to look of its site and of its city. I mean, how do you make sure that you don't have identical skylines across the world?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important to keep the character of the place and the city. But inevitably, the influx of international people does change things. I mean, Sydney is full of people from all over the world, and I've kind of noticed that, and I think I think it benefits from it. It's like London, really. You absorb the different cultures, but it doesn't change the fact that it's Sydney. You know, Sydney's very, it's got its own life and character, which particularly to do with the water, really. So much water, and the light on the water makes it very special. And the character of the city is fairly well defined, I think.
I think it's interesting you bring up migration and immigration and cosmopolitan cities, the various cities you described, and global cities across the world will, how should architects, is there anything they can do to reflect or respond to the changing demographics of our cities around the world? Is there anything that they should do, or is there anything that could be responsive to that?
I don't know, really. I think nothing stays the same in the world. I mean, nature is changing all the time. Climate's changing, everything's changing, and I think you have to accept that there's change and there's progress that comes from that. Technology is constantly speeding up, really, and I think you've got to respond to these things. I don't think there's any way of sort of battening down the hatches and saying, "Oh, we're not looking out. We are as we are. We're not going to change." I think you have to respond to what's happening in the world, really, and in life.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about 628 Bishopsgate in London, a project that you're working on.
Okay, well, London is a historic city, and we have to respect the history of the building, but they are accepting tall buildings now. And the way that the planners have chosen to control it is to have to keep specific views, particularly related to St Paul's Cathedral, from viewpoints around the city. So there's always a view of St Paul's Cathedral, because it was always the tallest, biggest monument in the city, and they don't want to obscure it. And so what this gives is a particular approach to all the buildings in the centre of the city near St Paul's. So our building, it steps and twists and relates to a diagonal line, which is a bit strange, of a view behind St Paul's from a particular place in the west of the city. So it's an odd set of circumstances, but it gives you an unusual building form, which I rather like. The idea that you have to work through this process, and when you start, you can't see a solution really, but it comes out. And what it does is get away from the sort of standard rectangular extruded form. And I think the other thing they're doing in the City of London is to group the towers. So there's our building is in the eastern cluster, and they've decided on which is the tallest building. The others sort of step down from the tallest building. Ours isn't the tallest, it's one of the step down buildings. And you get an interesting skylines through this sort of manipulation of heights. And each building's different, but I think the end result will be a kind of interesting composition of high-rise buildings. And I think that in a way, that kind of answers one of the earlier questions, which was how do you make cities different? And London has its own character.
And I guess in that case, the city said they're going to have one building be the tallest, we're going to have the buildings be over here in this cluster, but then it was up to each individual architect to distinguish themselves and respond to each other.
To respond to it, exactly. And they're pretty tough on the planning process is pretty tough, so they don't let you do anything you want necessarily. It's a process of discussion and reaching an agreement.
Do you think that's a positive thing, or is it too tough?
I think it's positive, actually. I mean, it feels tough when you're working through the process, but I'm happy with the result that we got, and I feel that it could have gone in all sorts of directions, but I'm happy with the result.